I'd like to tell you a little bit about my social media journey because I think there's a perception that social media is just a big waste of time and is only for celebrities and big sports stars and news personalities. And I just don't think that that's true. While it is true that all of those people use social media, there's a whole group of people who uses social media professionally and in promoting ideas and products. And I think that it can be a really valuable tool. So I got started using social media in 2009, which wasn't all that long ago. My sister dragged me onto Facebook. I was a holdout. I was a teacher at a college. I didn't want to friend students. And I was so busy, I couldn't imagine finding the extra time. But I got dragged in. And what I discovered when I joined Facebook was this whole group of people I hadn't connected with in years, but were such important and valuable parts of my life when I was a teenager and when I was in college. And it really was delightful to meet with them again and get to know them again. And since then, I've met lots of them as I've traveled around the country, and I happen to be in a city where I know somebody. I discovered later about Facebook that it was also a great way to keep connected with people that I knew at conferences but would only see, once or twice a year. And what it meant was that when we finally got to see each other in person at conferences, we no longer had to spend 30 minutes catching up about what was going on in our lives. We already knew that, and we could get right to the things that were important to talk about. So that was a surprise to me, and I was surprised at how connected I felt to people I hadn't seen in a long time. And so it came time to write my dissertation, and I was taking a sabbatical, which means I was going to be all on my own for 6 months with nothing to do but write this paper. And I was terrified because I thought for sure I would become one of those statistics, that people who don't finish their dissertations. But maybe you've heard this joke. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So I thought, well, how do you write a dissertation? And I said, well, it's got to be 1 hour at a time. And so I estimated it would probably take about 500 hours to write a dissertation, and I wanted to do something that kept myself on track. So I decided to take another plunge, and I dove into Twitter. And my rule was that I could only write about my dissertation if I had actually spent an hour working on it. And so I started tracking every hour that I wrote. And so after each hour, I shared a resource I had found or something I had discovered or a frustration I was having. And as the hours ticked by, I started to have followers who were really interested in my research, and it no longer felt like I was sitting at home writing this paper by myself. And so those people became a really valuable asset over time. They read chapters of my dissertation. They suggested resources when I was stuck. They provided technical tips for how to do things in programs I hadn't figured out how to do. And they were a support system for the days I was really frustrated. Many of them had been on this journey themselves, and several of them commented that they were reliving their own dissertation experience, for better or for worse, by watching mine. And the end result was that I not only finished the dissertation, but I also started to learn about a whole lot of other stuff that was just as valuable to me as what I was learning in my professional education. I learned all sorts of stuff about futuring, about learning analytics, about social media, which for some reason just became a real interest of mine. When I first started using Twitter, I made this rule for myself that I was never going to follow more than 50 people. And it's a really good exercise. I highly recommend it. What it meant was that I cultivated people to follow who provided something of value to me. So if somebody just tweeted about what they had for lunch and how their sports teams were doing and didn't provide anything of value to me in addition to that, I stopped following them. And I would pick somebody else instead to try out for a little while. Of course, you have to start by just following random people from this class, people in your profession, people that you think will provide something of value. But periodically, you have to go through and cut back. You notice that suddenly you have 75 people you're following, and you say, oh, got to cut that back. Who's not providing anything of value to me? And so for about a year, I think I kept it to about 50 people. But traveling to conferences, I met so many great people that eventually it was just not doable. So eventually I kind of grew that to about 100 people, kept that for a while, and then at some point I think I had to really expand. And I've kept it under 500 for a long time now. I find that my interests shift, people shift in and out of Twitter, and it's really interesting to me to go through the people I follow about once every couple months and, just kind of cull out the ones who are like, that never really provides me anything of value. Or I'm just really sick of hearing about this topic or something like that. Because the truth is that if somebody isn't providing you anything of value, you don't have any obligation to follow them. That's not it. One other little story that I should relate here is that sometime during the last 5 years, I got a contract to design video games. And so suddenly I needed to learn how to design video games. And so knowing already what I knew about Twitter, I basically turned Twitter into a mentoring network. I started to follow video game designers. I followed educational video game designers, and I followed game designers from the standard industry. And I mimicked what they did. If they read an article, I read the article. If they recommended a board game, I played it to see what was so great about it. If they were sharing stuff from a conference, I followed the hashtag and got all the great resources. And at first it was completely overwhelming. I didn't know the language, and I didn't know the games, and it was a completely foreign industry to me. But over time that changed, and over time maybe half the links were stuff I'd seen before, and then maybe 25% of the links were stuff I'd seen before, until I felt like I had become a comfortable part of the conversation that happens on Twitter around this topic. And in fact, several years later, I have games out there on the market. So it was, in the end, very successful. And I don't know that there was any other way I could have realistically learned what I had to learn in a short amount of time. There are educational programs on game design, but I'm not going back to school for 2 more years or 4 more years. I had a contract where I had to deliver something the next year. So I guess the reason for my telling you this story is to show you that there are alternate uses for social media that you might not have been thinking about. The last part of this story I should share is how I came to start teaching social media. For any of you who've actually gone and dug into my bio or my blogs, you'll see that I taught math at a community college for about 10 years. But I have a lot of background in other things, including an MBA. And when the time came for my college to offer a social media course, I knew more about social media than anybody on the campus. I had a very active Twitter following. I gave talks at conferences about social media. I've been following social media issues for years. I was fascinated by the legal issues and the ethical issues. And so I was asked to develop a course on social media. So what you're seeing here is a little bit more of an open style course based on that. There's not all the writing requirements that there were in the real course, but the readings and the discussions are all the same. And I taught that course in 2012, and it was great fun. And we learned so much from each other in the process of teaching the course. It was a community experience, and I'm hoping that that's what this will be too.